You won't believe what Nigel Farage has just dragged into the open. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. This isn't a slip of the tongue. This isn't a media misquote. This is the quiet unraveling of a promise that was never meant to be kept.
So Keir Starmer's great Brexit betrayal is fully underway. Of course, remember, he was Remainer-in-Chief. He was the man pushing, above all, for a second referendum to overturn the result. But he went to the country in July 2024 with some absolute assurances. We would not be rejoining the single market, the customs union, or the European Union. Well, let's have a little think about what he's done. Already, he's scrapped the Turing programme. That was for British students to go to universities all over the world. It was great value for money. Gone. Replaced by the Erasmus scheme, which is going to cost 8 billion quid over the next 10 years. And what that means is whilst some of our students will go to Europe, actually many, many more European students will come to our country. Add to that a youth mobility scheme, where once again, many more from Europe will come here than we will go there.
Before we continue, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Britain Daily. It's completely free, and it helps us keep bringing you the hard-hitting stories that matter. Back to the chaos. Keir Starmer went to the country in July 2024 with crystal clear assurances. No return to the single market, no customs union, no creeping back into the European Union through the side door. Case closed, apparently. Except it wasn't. Because when you look at what's actually happened since, not the slogans, not the speeches, but the decisions, a very different picture emerges. And Farage, for all his faults, has just pulled on a thread that exposes the whole pattern. Let's start with Brexit itself. Starmer was never neutral. He was never moving on. He was Remainer-in-Chief, the loudest voice pushing for a second referendum to overturn the result. That matters, because ideology doesn't disappear when a campaign ends. It just goes underground, and now it's resurfacing. First move, the scrapping of the Turing scheme, a British-controlled programme that allowed UK students to study across the world. Good value, global reach, gone. Replaced with Erasmus, an EU scheme, projected to cost £8 billion over the next decade. And here's the detail no one wants to talk about. Far more European students will come here than British students will go there. Add a youth mobility scheme on top of that, and the imbalance deepens. More movement into Britain, more pressure on housing, services and borders, all while being sold as opportunity. And that's just the warm-up. Because this weekend, Starmer openly stated that Britain is now following single market food rules, and that we may align even more closely with single market regulations if it's in our national interest. Stop there. Align doesn't mean negotiate. Align doesn't mean influence. Align means follow. Follow rules written elsewhere. Follow regulations Britain no longer votes on. Follow decisions made by institutions we were explicitly told we had left. That is not Brexit continuity. That is Brexit reversal by stealth. And it gets worse. Energy. Just as the public is waking up to what net zero policies have already done, skyrocketing bills, deindustrialisation, by now one thing should be painfully clear. This didn't happen by accident. You don't quietly align with single market rules. You don't sign up to EU energy frameworks. You don't scrap British-controlled programmes and replace them with Brussels-designed ones, unless that was always the destination. This is the point Farage was circling, and the moment Starmer didn't expect to be cornered on. Because Brexit wasn't just a vote about trade, it was about sovereignty. Who makes the rules? Who controls borders? Who decides how Britain does business with the rest of the world? And yet, nearly a decade on, we're being told that alignment is pragmatic, that rule following is sensible, and that giving up leverage is somehow in the national interest. But whose national interest? Let's talk trade. By tying Britain back into EU regulatory orbit, you don't just copy standards, you surrender flexibility. You limit who you can trade with, how quickly you can move, and how competitive your economy can be in a world that is shifting east, not west. India, Southeast Asia, the Far East, emerging markets hungry for deals. These are the growth engines of the 21st century. Yet aligning with the single market means designing your economy around a bloc that is stagnating. Demographically, industrially, and economically. That's not strategy. That's retreat. And then there's tariffs. Under the EU's carbon border mechanisms, Britain risks being dragged into a system where tariffs are imposed on non-EU countries deemed to have high emissions. In plain English, we would be punishing our own trading partners to stay in step with Brussels' climate framework. Remember the outrage when Donald Trump imposed tariffs? Now we're quietly signing up to do the same thing, without even having a seat at the table. So when Farage says this parliament is unrepresentative, he's not talking about party logos. He's talking about mindset. Labour want alignment, the Lib Dems want the customs union, large chunks of the Conservatives never believed in Brexit in the first place. Different colours, same direction. And that brings us to immigration, the issue Brexit voters were promised would be addressed. The truth? Control never came back. Under the so-called Boris wave, net migration surged, nearly 1 million arrivals in a single year. And here's the part that rarely gets explained. Once Britain left the EU framework without replacing it properly, key controls vanished, protections went, systems broke, loopholes opened. Not by chaos, but by design. Because if you never wanted Brexit to succeed, the easiest way to kill it is to make it look unworkable, create frustration, fuel regret, then present realignment as the grown-up solution. That's the playbook. And while the public argues over personalities, Boris, Starmer, Farage, the machinery keeps moving in one direction only, away from national control. This is why Northern Ireland matters. This is why regulatory divergence matters. This is why energy, borders, and law matter. Because once sovereignty is fragmented, it's almost impossible to put back together. What happens if this doesn't stop at alignment, but ends in full regionalisation of Britain itself? That's where this story really goes. If you've stayed with me this far, you already know this isn't really about Brexit anymore. Brexit was just the battlefield. The real war is about control. Because once you zoom out, a pattern appears, not just in Britain, but across Europe. Power isn't being returned to nations. It's being broken up, redistributed, and diluted until no single people can resist it. Look at the structure of the United Kingdom today. Scotland? No sovereign parliament, a devolved assembly operating under administrative systems that increasingly resemble European regional governance. Wales? The same. Northern Ireland? Locked into arrangements that treat it differently from the rest of the UK. Despite constitutional protections, these aren't accidents, they're features. Regionalisation is a core EU governance model. It weakens nation-states by replacing them with manageable administrative zones, regions that depend upward, not outward. And now look at England. The largest population, the strongest legal tradition, the biggest obstacle. English common law and the English constitutional framework underpin the rights of the entire United Kingdom. They are the reason sovereignty still exists in practice, not just theory. So what do you do if you want to neutralise that? You carve England up. Regional mayors, merged councils, artificial regions with executive power, but no historic legitimacy. It's sold as efficiency, it's framed as reform, but in reality, it's fragmentation. Once England is broken into regions, the constitutional spine disappears. Counties with centuries of identity, Kent, Yorkshire, Devon, Surrey, Sussex, become lines on a spreadsheet. And when that happens, control over everything follows. Business regulation, energy supply, food standards, defence coordination, even intelligence sharing, all shifted upward, further away from voters, wrapped in bureaucratic language that no one ever voted for. This is why Farage's intervention matters. Even if you don't like him, even if you disagree with his politics, he's pointing at the direction of travel. Starmer didn't discover this path after taking office. He inherited it and chose to accelerate it. And the biggest betrayal isn't policy, it's process. There was no referendum on realignment, no mandate for regulatory submission, no vote on EU energy frameworks or carbon tariff regimes. These decisions are being made quietly, incrementally, deliberately, betting that the public is too distracted, too tired, or too divided to push back. But history says something else. People don't revolt when they lose everything. They revolt when they realise they were never told the truth. So here's the real question this series leaves you with. Are we watching the final chapter of Brexit, or the opening chapter of something far bigger? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them. If this video added clarity, hit the like button, share it, and subscribe so this doesn't disappear down the algorithm. Because once sovereignty is gone, you don't get a second vote.